Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. As I have said before, and I feel bears repeating, life itself is a psychedelic experience. And for each of us, the ability of us to explore psychedelic states in otherwise sober states of reality can differ depending upon our ability to tune into the subtle energies and frequencies around us. For some of us, we are born with a deeper connection to these subtleties and frequencies. And today on the show, I will be talking to an amazing woman who has not only been able to access these subtle energies and frequencies for the entirety of her life and act as a channel for them, but has also been called to serve others in the way of translating the information within these frequencies to allow them to peek behind the veil, discover new aspects of their lives and life as a whole, through helping them to deprogram the ego and tune into the quantum field and have the opportunity to gain closure in situations where loved ones who have passed on come through to relay information to her through her mediumship work. So please, help me in welcoming my dear friend Mary Buckingham to the show. Mary, what's up? So good to see you.
Oh my gosh, I just have to say that intro, we almost don't even need to do a show now because that intro was so beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much.
Did you write that?
Yeah. I read all the intros.
That was beautiful. I'm sorry. We got to acknowledge Ryan right
now. Mary, you're the best. And, for everyone listening, like Mary and I think I go into this a little bit in the outro, but, when we met, it was literally like we just picked up in a previous lifetime. It was like, oh, sweet meat suit in this lifetime. Like, let's dive right back in,
God,
and so
it's...
Yes. And I imagine, especially talking to someone like you can read into this stuff, right? So I imagine we could go down so many side quests about what that might be and how people tap into past lives and all this kind of stuff. But, considering this podcast is based on psychedelics and considering the fact that you live, some could argue in a psychedelic state pretty much all the time, being able to access these things, because for me, like psychedelics, they're not the only way to access these things. They can be a reminder of how we can access these things all the time. What I'm curious on for you is, how did you start accessing these states or noticing you were at a younger age? How did that start playing out? Did at first you think like you were crazy? Did people tell you not to look at it? Did they actually tell you like, hey, that's totally normal? Like, tell us a little bit about how you were brought up and how you were able to recognize these states that you were tuning into.
Yes. So basically, I think I remember having early memories of more so it being around the heart chakra and having a lot of what people would label as clairsentience. So that is one of the clair senses where you feel others. And then the clairvoyance, which is more of the visual, where you can see things. That was also something that existed, I think, when I was really young. I mean, some of my earliest memories of having imaginary friends and things like this was like around 4 or 5. And then I think more as I got to middle school and junior high is when I think I just started, it's like the ego really starts to get awake and developed at that point. And I started to become hyper conscious of other people's perception of me. And I think of being highly sensitive or an empath, it might have been magnified at that point. So I was more sensitive to like criticism or things like that. So I got a general sense, less of even what people were literally saying, but more of what I was feeling from others, that they weren't in the same place of perceiving things that were more in the subtle realm. So I just learned, and I would be met with comments like, you're thinking too much, or you're way too sensitive, or I don't know what you're talking about. And I just slowly started to kind of close that off. And it wasn't that it ever shut off. I hear a lot of stories about people with these abilities who, become self-conscious, or they get shut down by parents or teachers or religious institutions, and they shut it off, like they put a cap on it. For me, it felt like, I'll liken it to more of like filling up an empty water bottle with air and the cap is on. And it just seemed like over time, the pressure started to accrue, to where about, I don't even know, several years ago when I entered into my journey of actually sobriety, I started to wake up to, okay, so there's all this energy that I'm suppressing, compressing, forcing down. So there's energetic practices that I can do to release these things, ground my body, and then also incorporate breath work. So ultimately, breath work is what really took things from kind of trying to come back out of a state of numbing myself, whether it's food, weed, alcohol, any other things. And it wasn't really extreme, but I was definitely living a life where I was just numbing myself and self-medicating. So when I brought breath work in, during my early phase of getting sober, that's where I started entering into these altered states and experiencing huge downloads, huge epiphanies. All of my chakras started splitting open. And then each year I would say it starts to get more magnified, which has not been easy. And I went through a phase, particularly probably about 3 or 4 years ago, where it went from one level to another level. Like the leap was really fast. And that's where, the visuals were getting stronger. Hearing the thought forms, which is the clairaudience, was stronger, to where if I was having a conversation with somebody at a market and they're like, oh, hey, how are you? How's the weather? I was actually hearing more strongly what they were energetically speaking to me, which is like, the best way to describe it is, let's say it's someone in a market and they're an angry cash register checking you out. When they're saying, hi, how's your day going? Sort of in an automatic, unconscious way, I can actually hear them saying, hi, how's your day going? Like they're screaming. And so for me, it's like, it's not about tuning into that energy or feeling that energy and judging of the other. A big part of the journey has been, okay, if we are all connected in this universal mind and we can all see and feel this energy on a telepathic level, eventually we're all moving in this direction. It's not to judge of the other or to take on their energy, which is another thing with empathic boundaries. It's to be grounded in your body, know who you are, and beam that higher frequency energy of love so that you're good with whatever you're being met with. And you can leave unscathed, basically, on an energy level. And I know, like, some people are like, that's not what I'm experiencing. So part of the last few years has just been mastering that.
Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show. That is amazing. You know, it's so cool because, especially like, you know, the example you gave about the cash register clerk, I'm just sure that makes life more interesting. You know, you're like, what the hell is going on there, right? Like, you know, how long did it take you to notice what was happening when that was going on?
I think particularly when things got to a place where it got so amplified that I actually had to stay inside for a while. And I would go to the market, get food, and I can work remotely. So it wasn't like it hindered my working ability. But when I'm doing these readings day to day, it kind of is always putting me into that state. So what's become extremely important is these practices of grounding, so that when I do leave a session, close the session, walk out the door, I'm able to get in my car, drive to the market, and not be tapped into that field, which we can call the universal mind, the quantum field. But yeah, I mean, practices like breath work, surfing, hiking, things that get me back into my body allow me to be one with myself, have the awareness and space between me and the other, which is like people, places, things, mountain, sky, trees. There's always information coming off of all these things. But as long as I'm bringing myself back into my body, meditating, and I don't even like to use the word meditating. I like to use deep listening, where it's like you can sit in a seated posture, close your eyes, relax your shoulders, take slow, deep breaths to slow it down. And then you just start to like listen. Your ego might be yelling, or it might be crying, meaning inside. And a part of it is like, okay, get into that centered place of, okay, I'm listening. I hear you. I recognize that there's a programmed fear coming in, or there's some sort of anxiety, something that the ego is projecting into the future, which then when the ego projects images into the future, a part of ourself can attach emotion to that. So what I see a lot of is people coming in and they're on this roller coaster of emotions, ego stories, ungroundedness, which being caught in the intellect and the mind is ungrounded. So there's a different aspect of ego and intellect ungroundedness, and then the spirit realm etheric ungroundedness, just in my experience. So yeah, I mean, as you can see in our conversations too, like I can just start going off in all different types of directions.
It's so amazing. I mean, I learn so much every time I talk to you. And, one of the things that you talked about was the clairsenses, right? And I've been obsessed with these for a couple of years. And I think this would be something that I would love for you to go into a little bit deeper, because I imagine, like, here's where I want to go with this, right? Like, I realized that when I learned about the clairsenses, I worked with a psychic for like 14 weeks. And it was funny, I'd heard about the clairsenses for years, I had thought about them. But when I worked with her, she helped me actually like put a story to like what I was already experiencing. And I think for a lot of people, they might have that same realization of like, wait a minute, that thing that I've been experiencing my whole life that I never even thought to put a name on because it's such a normal thing is actually one of these clairsenses, because I think for a lot of people, if they're like me, they heard about clairsenses and they were like, oh, I wish I could access those. And it was like, no, you're already accessing them. It's just that it's been such a normal part of your life that you've never thought that anyone else didn't have access to it, or that it was something that you'd want to put a name on or anything like that. Like for me, one of the things that I learned about clairvoyance was that typically if you're looking up to the left like that and you're talking, you're tapping into like a clairvoyance, right? It's almost like putting your eyes on hold so you can access like the third eye and be able to like, you see an image and all of a sudden that image informs you with like language and a story to tell and everything. And for me, analogies come forth a lot when I'm accessing clairvoyance, where all of a sudden I just see like this way in which to describe something that's usually, it's not like I see an actual picture, but it's like, I don't know how to actually describe it, but it's a picture. It is one, but it's not like looking at you or like looking into this room. It's more of like some sort of information that gets translated into a picture. And then from that picture and looking at it, I sense what to feel. And what Krishanti told me, the psychic I worked with, was that ideally, or like in most people, they have one clairsense that's going to be more predominant than others. Yet they really work best when you start really like shaping and morphing them all. Because like, for instance, you might have a feeling that then informs you of a picture, that then informs you of a story to say. And then, you might have the clairaudience coming through, or like the claircognizance of just a knowing. One time Rachel at work was dealing with something, Rachel, my partner. And so we worked at this dispensary together. Just straight up, there was this guy there who was really weird. And, a couple of the girls there started having these experiences where like some random number was texting them saying that like they had met them, and like basically this woman was texting Rachel saying, "Hey, I had you on my phone as R Red Rocks, like, did I meet you at Red Rocks?" And me and Rachel were like, I mean, we were definitely on medicines when we were there, but like I would have remembered that. Like I was very consciously aware, I microdosed, etc. So I was like, I don't know. I mean, maybe. I don't know. So they started talking to her. They were trying to get certain pictures, like just all this weird stuff going on. And basically what happened was one day she was walking through the dispensary and all of a sudden she just heard and knew at the same time who it was. And it wasn't like obvious. She just was like, oh my God, it is him. And then she started sharing with the other women and they like started having the same realization and it ended up being him. So like things like that are like real world examples of like claircognizance, things like that. So I would love if you could go into kind of like your depiction of these clair senses and how they come forth for you, in the hopes that maybe someone hears it and goes, oh, wow, actually, I experience that all the time. That's what that is. That's really cool.
Yes. I like those examples that you gave from both that other woman and your partner, like perfect. So basically, like when you are a being who's tuning into the senses that go beyond our five senses that we've become so accustomed to only living within, when a part of you starts to peek into beyond those five senses, it is very much this learning process of like, okay, what is that saying to me? And what's that saying to me? And what's that saying to me? So I'll walk through my experience with some of the clair senses. And I'll just disclaimer say, with everyone, to always take everything anybody says with a grain of salt, because we all have our own free will and we all know what's best first and foremost, and that all teachers can offer information to activate and open doors. But ultimately, you are the one who's going to know best how you exist within the field of clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience. And I say that because I feel like having that foundational like permission slip or reminder from somebody is so that you automatically, as we're sitting here or they're listening, they're like in that seat of, okay, I'm hearing and listening to her, but I'm also at the same time grounded in my body and seeing what's resonating. Because while that might be true for her or him, some version or blended version of both of their aspects is true for me. And that doesn't mean that it's wrong or right. It just means that your instrument expresses in that clair within that way. That I think has been the biggest thing for me, where it's like, if you can imagine as a listener right now that you're in a cave and you can't see anything. And all of a sudden you see a flashlight coming from some part of the cave. And this flashlight is maybe coming from the northern part of the cave and it's pointing right down to your left foot. And there's all of these things being shown down there that you couldn't see before, but some light has turned on. And actually, if you can think about that, that light coming in through some aspect of the tunnel is a part of your consciousness that actually has peeked past the five senses, and it's coming in some way that your five senses would have never seen or guessed before. And all of a sudden this tunnel of light comes in, and a part of your awareness is learning all of this information just from seeing a tunnel of light come through a crack that that perforated through this cave. And then it's shining on this other wall of the cave that maybe has hieroglyphs and scripts of information. And this is all metaphorical, but it's like, it can be so deep when it's just a quick moment. So with the clairsentience, like they do say that, like with Gary Sukov's book, The Seed of the Soul, our heart is our central intelligence. And the auric field that our heart does emit is much broader and wider than the auric field of our brain. So because it's our true intelligence, I'd say with clairsentience and all of the clair abilities, it's more about the experiencing of it. So typically, let's say when you're in a space of heart compassion and empathy, where you are feeling for the other, for humanity, for self, you're basically opening your transmitter or antenna to receive information on the feeling level, on the higher intelligence of the heart. And you might receive information, let's say, of somebody who's grieving a partner that has passed. And then typically, let's say in mediumship, the partner who has passed can ride into that wave of your heart transmitter, transducer, whatever you want to use. And they can speak to you through visual, thought form, or feeling in the heart. The next would be clairaudience. So clairaudience is in your throat chakra. It's the seat of expression, of speaking truth. And it's also how we hear thought forms. So I personally do not hear audible voices. Some people do, but there is a difference between hearing disembodied voices and then hearing and being able to translate thought forms. On the back of our head, if you can feel the back of your head, there's that little ridge. And then right below it, there's kind of like a open space, and they call this the mouth of God. So, and it's this for me is where, if you imagine like closing your eyes, the information of clairaudience, thought form, hearing thoughts, things like this, it comes in actually through that center in the back. And the best way I can describe it is like if you can imagine a projector machine behind your head or my head, whatever, and it's projecting clear iridescent like 3D imagery. I close my eyes and I'll see those things come through, and that's typically how guide or ancestor or flashback of memories or something that somebody went through will show to me, and that they'll speak in thought form through that way. So basically, like when somebody comes in, my eyes are closed the whole time, and I ask them, do not provide me with any information. Don't give me any names of anyone you want to connect with. Because for me, it's not up to me on who wants to come through. It is only up to me to be in conversation with my highest self, the other person's highest self, and then pulling information from universal mind, the quantum realm, for the highest good of the person and thereby of all. So there's definitely times where it's important that when you use these centers of reception, which is another way of referring to the clair senses, they're basically just different dials on a radio that you tune into to bring in information, and then they express differently per person. So another example of the clairaudience would be the one that I was referring to earlier of being in a market and I'm talking to somebody and they're saying, hey, how's the weather? How's your day going? But what I'm really hearing is their energy yelling. And then the energy yelling can then be matched with a visual and a flash of a memory or someone that has passed or a traumatic incident that they're caught in a loop on. And so when that loop is revealed from an outside awareness, which would be the channel, the individual who's tapping into that higher information, it provides both beings the opportunity to not only be co-creating by connecting in that realm, but for the other being who might not be consciously aware that they're caught in a loop to hear it, to receive it in their receptors, and to either say that resonates or it doesn't. It's very rare that when things are brought from that field and shared with somebody that it doesn't resonate, because it is a soul language. And the soul language is typically penetrated into the heart. And when they're feeling what's being translated, that's really all that matters. Whatever spirit source, whatever they believe in, and them, whatever happens between them with that information is their journey. I'm merely just witnessing what occurs when the information comes out. So the clairvoyance in our third eye, it's said that our hypothalamus in our brain is the seat of our third eye, which is why breath work is amazing to activate and decalcify that, or will decalcify the pineal gland and activate the hypothalamus. So that's where the visuals can come from. It's interesting though, because the visuals for me, like I was kind of saying, come from the back through the mouth of God and show as those projected images. So my clairvoyance and clairaudience actually work kind of hand in hand, kind of like you were saying, where one will meet the other, and then you'll kind of have to marry those two and then deliver the message. So clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience. Then there's clairolfactory, where you can smell certain things. This is getting a little intense, but there is sometimes with sexual abuse energy, it can have a certain type of metallic-y odor. And typically when that energy is sensed through that clair, that's when the other clairs will kind of come in and meet it and provide additional information to then bring a broader picture to what is being said by this other being's higher self. Another term for the higher self, we can refer to as is oversoul, which is like, it's that aspect of ourself that is the accumulation of all of our soul's experiences, which, as we get into, I don't know, some people say with channeling or quantum field information, it's like you're kind of going into these higher dimensions. So whether it's fifth dimension or whatever else, in the fifth dimension, the matter doesn't exist. It's just a point of awareness. So as you ascend into that space within a session, space and time actually then no longer exist. So then in addition to receiving information through our receptor centers, our clairsenses, we get into a different bandwidth of time and space. And when we're there, information can come in super fast. So this is different for everyone, I think, in a certain way. But like, let's say somebody books a session. I see them walk into my door. All I have to do is look at them. And typically they'll get like an email before saying, please don't give me any information on anything you're dealing with or anyone you're trying to connect with. Like maybe your name, but more often I actually don't even know their name. I just see the time that they've booked and that someone's coming in at noon. I'll look at them. I'll give them the breeze over of a session. They'll sit down. I'll close my eyes. But when I look at them is typically when it goes, everything comes through instantaneously. So then it's kind of like when they come in, it's more about being a space holder and sort of guiding them to understand that they're entering into a ceremonial space that's sacred, it's protected, it's safe, and that we're about to enter into a space beyond time, a time beyond space. And for them, all they have to do is just sit, receive, listen. And then even just being in that space can also open up their receptors. So there's so many layers to it. It's like,
it's incredible. I mean, I love hearing this because when you're talking, I'm like, oh, that reminds me of this. That reminds me of this. And you were talking about, I wrote a couple notes down actually over here. So first, you were talking about that cap, right? The cap that kind of gets put on people. And it's funny because in mystery school, I'm a life activation practitioner, and part of the life activation is removing a cap, right?
Oh, wow.
So, it's interesting because they say that not everyone has one, but you can kind of sense when they do, and as I've been doing life activations, I can sense when someone has one of those caps. And, I have noticed an interesting correlation between certain lifestyles rather, and lifestyle practices. And also certain, I'll be vague here, but things maybe people got in the last couple of years, and that providing a cap, right? Or making a cap there, been very interesting, for sure. And so I wanted to mention that. And then you talked about the it coming through the mouth of God. So it's really funny you say that, because there's a woman named Eileen Day McCusick who wrote Tuning the Human Biofield and Electric Body, Electric Universe, I think is her second book. And she's amazing. And she's big into tuning forks. And she literally in her book, Tuning the Human Biofield, talks about that and describes it as when things drop through the mail slot. And she's talking about exactly the same spot. So I thought that was really cool because, I've always said that same thing when I get that. And you actually helped me see that, for me, clairaudience was the one that was still a little challenging for me. But I'm realizing now, like, oh, no, I'm accessing that too. It's just that, again, my logical mind thought that, oh, it's always going to come through as a hearing thing. So ringing in the ears, which I have been getting a lot recently. Yeah. And every time I'm like, what are you trying to tell me? I don't understand rings, so it's pretty funny you said that too. And, then you were talking about the dials, right? How like these things are like dials. And when I was working with Krishanti, there's a part of our meditation, like the kind of like the foundational meditation that you do to access the psychic senses, where literally you picture a TV with these 5 dials, right? Or I think there's a couple more than that too. But you turn clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance, clairolfactory, and there's one for taste too. I forget the name. You turn all those up, and then there's one that you picture for the analytical mind. You turn that down to 2. And then what you're doing from there is you're actually turning down the first, second, third, and fourth chakras, and then turning up the top 3. And that's usually when you start going out, and then you start picturing this rose on the TV, and whatever color the rose turns starts to inform you about your client that you're working with. And it's fascinating stuff. When I was doing it, like, especially like as someone who is a mental projector, like in human design, like I literally like live in the mental construct. And so it was funny because I could hear that voice going like, this is stupid, this isn't working. And then literally the more I just allowed it to happen, the person I was reading would be like, whoa, that was totally accurate. And it would be like stuff that my logical mind would never have come up with.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I see you at this, house that has a boat in the backyard, and the boat is covered with a green tarp. She's like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. So, it's really interesting. You were talking about the dials, and then the last thing I had written down was you were talking about this whole idea of like the souls, like the oversoul, right? So kind of like the soul's experiences. So I have a friend named Laurel Erica who talks about language. I don't know if you've heard of her before, but she's like incredible. She's basically a rapper, but like a poetic rapper. And she's in her 70s, and she's like unbelievable. She's one of the coolest people I've ever met. And she actually lives in, I think, Santa Monica. But she was talking about how the English language, for instance, has had a lot of its like power dampened. And also like there's a whole deeper conspiracy theory about the English language being like a language that was kind of meant to imprison, which is why we have so many words for undesirable states like anxiety, depression, etc. Yeah. But she was talking about how these words that used to mean something so big and deep now mean something that's not big and deep. And so she was talking about this word called anamnesis, which is a soul remembering its past lives, its information kind of connecting to that oversoul, where now if you look up what anamnesis means, it means a patient's medical records. So like they're taking this language and shaping it. And so it was just fascinating when you were mentioning that. Again, so many synchronicities every time I talk to you, Mary. And, there's literally so many things I could get into here. But, I think that based on us talking about the clairsenses and getting into this kind of conversation, like a lot of people right now are hearing about channeling, right? And like channeling is like, it's a buzzword, but it's also very accurate as to what I understand is what was happening when people say channeling. How do you define channeling, and what does it kind of look like for you? And, my reason for this is that I imagine a lot of the people listening to are kind of like inundated with all these catch words and buzzwords, but yet like they're probably, if they're like me anyway, I won't project onto them. They're probably calculating with their logical mind. So like channeling, I understand the concept, but what does that actually feel like and how is it useful? So if you could go into that a little bit, that'd be fantastic.
And I want to thank you for everything you said, because I'm trying to keep mental tabs of like what I want to return to about literally everything you just said. So particularly with the radio dial analogy, that's one that I use a lot. And so I'll just bookmark that. We'll return there in a second. But
cool.
Oh my gosh, this is such a great question for many reasons, because personally, I will just also say this. I have had so big part of my journey has been breaking through personal judgment of being a being who has been made the way I am. Coming in, being in this world and existing in this world, and being inundated with societal programming and judgment and structure, I really tried my best to live and exist within that way. I went to undergrad, I got my master's degree, I worked in corporate jobs, and the level of suffering that I experienced increased exponentially because I felt like I was living a lie. And yet I was terrified to basically come out and start to like open up the throat chakra, start to live and speak my truth. So the fact that I'm even on a podcast, even on social media, like starting to put myself out there more has been something that I have really had to work through, because even being somebody who is tuned in and experienced all the things, has really deep sessions, has built a private practice in not that much time, I understand like why people have these concepts or fear or just confusion around, well, what the heck are you tuning into? Who dubbed you the role of being this Chandler, whatever else? And I just basically had to get to a point where that ego mind that had all those preconceived judgments, or that was sensitive to the imprint from I just let it go. And just sort of the way that I describe it is that channeling it's a modality that's actually exists within a really big spectrum. There's trance channelers like Edgar Casey or Jane Roberts, who, if anyone listening hasn't looked at their material and is interested, they're both incredible. And Edgar Casey has a lot of stuff, especially where he would incorporate medical information for people to apply at a time when it was not happening at all. And he had groundbreaking stuff. So simply put, for me as a channel, I'm a being who closes my eyes, and I'm simply turning on my tuner to hear the subtle senses within our universe. Another way of putting it is I sort of enter into my higher self as the person comes in. The primary being or thing or center of information that's communicating to me from them is their higher self, which, as we talked about earlier, another way of viewing it could be your oversoul, your true self that withholds all of the information of all of your soul or spirit's existences. Some people can refer to this space, the universal mind, as the Akashic, which is said to be the recorder of all space and time and everything that's ever existed. And so really it's a matter of me entering into a space of complete quiet or deep listening, aka a meditative state. It's a skill where I kind of turn on the tuner or turn on the buttons for these receptor centers, the clair centers. And the being comes in, and boom, it's kind of like a fusing of the universal mind. And then it just becomes a conversation between those two information centers. And honestly, in sessions, I always say my eyes are going to be closed the whole time, but interrupt me at any point. Like if you feel there needs to be a redirection, or if you desire to go deeper into this aspect, interrupt, pivot, whatever. But typically what happens is, because the information just starts to pour out so quickly, I usually look at my watch around, or my phone, I don't have a watch, around like 7 to 8 minutes, and a ton of information has come out. So that's where also with channeling, we're bringing in information from a different frequency, and typically within those different frequency bands, time and space is different. So then when people enter into this space with me, they're required to kind of try to listen from a listening center that they don't typically listen from, but where it's coming through actually targets and almost like a laser beam, that direct receptor within them. So sometimes people will say, oh, there's some strange sensation I'm getting in like my solar plexus, or I keep seeing this ring of blue around your head, or I keep seeing twinkles all around the room. And I'm always like, perfect. Now this is part of you that's seeing things that you actually do see, but your five senses are so overprogrammed or overworked that you're actually not seeing, in quotes, what's there. And I also say, so just let yourself see it, but also like detach from, oh my gosh, I'm seeing things, I'm tuning in, because it's like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And that's also not, I am also not saying it's the goal for people to come in and start having all these crazy things happening. It can just happen. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Oh, 100% it did. And, it's cool too, because what I've found is that in many different things throughout life, like, I remember when I was a kid and I was learning how to ride a bike. And I remember my dad used to be behind me, like, pushing me, right? And he'd be like holding onto the seat. So I had no training wheels at this point, right? Like I was, it was my first day, no training wheels. Let's try it out. And I remember I took off and I start riding and he's like, I'm not with you. You're doing it on your own. And I went, really? And I got so excited. I looked back to look and I fell, right? So I think a lot of what you were saying there in terms of like when people are noticing a lot, like, oh my God, I'm seeing this thing. The more that you attach onto those things, the less likely you're going to stay in that state. And that's specifically what I've noticed about, whether or not I want to call it just clairvoyance or all of these senses kind of putting together and channeling too. Like what I've noticed is that when I go into deep meditations, and this started happening in a combination of like, because I started going to the mystery school, getting my DNA activated. And then I also started working with Krishanti at the same time. So I knew what to look for. And I was also getting quote unquote upgraded. I don't know if I want to call it that, but altered if you want to call it that. Right. And so I started getting deeper into meditating longer periods too, like 45 minutes instead of 30.
Wow.
And what I would start noticing is like I would have these moments where I would like start seeing an image, but then my mind would go, oh my God, is that something? Boom,
Yes.
Gone. Right. Now I've gotten to a point where I can actually like, it takes about 30 minutes of meditating to really get to this point, usually 25, 30, but I can start seeing images and it's not as like, oh my God, I can just look at them and I can actually like look around and move my eyes and see different corners of it. Sometimes I see some wild stuff that like a dream, I start to forget afterwards. But one of the things that started happening to me too, I have a lot of interesting things happening at this point in my life. But one of the things that was interesting was when I wake up in the morning and I'm like very like still kind of in that like, theta state, maybe even a little bit delta, I can close my eyes and I can almost see like a page with all this writing on it. And I can start just going over it. And in my head, not audibly, but in my head, I can just start reading it. And it's almost like automatic writing, but it's like automatic reading in a way, right? Where like these words are just there. If I try to actually look at what they are, I lose it. But if I just allow myself to start like going over it, I'll just start telling myself this crazy story. And sometimes it's about all this random stuff that's like super intricate. But the second I try to remember it, it goes away. And so that was reminding me of like what you were talking about there. Because I think part of like the quote unquote skill is knowing that like, okay, yes, I am seeing things. Yes. Like, I think this is where the intellect has helped me a lot too, of understanding like, hey, this actually makes some logical sense if I understand what, every individual since the dawn of time that's been spiritual has been talking about in, quantum physics with the quantum field and things like that. So I'm really glad you brought that up because I think for a lot of people, like they could be falling into these things already and just like either not knowing what they are or like zapping themselves out of it because they get so excited. And I know how it is. It is exciting when you start getting into it and you're just like, especially if you're a seeker and you're curious and you've always known there's more to life than what we've been sold. Then you start experiencing this stuff. I think that's, for me anyway, that's what interested me in psychedelics originally was that I had no idea that I could access these things without them. And then as I started realizing like, oh, I don't need psychedelics to access this stuff. I can actually turn my whole life into a psychedelic experience. That's helped a lot.
Well,
for sure.
And it's, as you're saying this, it now I get a ping of, remember to go back to that radio analogy because it directly relates to what you said, which is that it's a couple things. There's that the deep listening, which I keep referring to, or meditation, the more commonly referred to phrase, where part of that deep listening is being in that centered state of noticing all of the information coming in through all of your different receptor centers, aka your clairsenses, as well as your ego mind, which we all have within this human experience. And this is so key to any part of anyone's journey in this realm, meaning, spirituality, self-development, whatever you want to call it, is sort of mastering your ego mind, which might have a lot of trauma. It might have a lot of dogmatic indoctrination. It might have a super critical voice from a parent or parents. Obviously trauma is becoming so much more talked about now, so I won't go down that rabbit hole, but it's I'd say, with the radio analogy, in your process of deep listening, where you start to enter into a space of start to turn down the loud volume coming from your external environment. So part of this beginning process of healing or recovering or advancing or upgrading, whatever you want to call it, ascending, you start to reflect and take inventory of all of these basic aspects of your life. How is my external environment? How's my job? How are my habits? How am I eating? How am I engaging in activity? How am I moving my body? Next, how am I talking to myself? How much of me is in unconsciousness on a day-to-day basis? How much of me is living from a state of auto drive, of automated, pre-recorded behavior? Then as you start to turn up the volume of higher conscious awareness, you actually start to become, for some people or most people, uncomfortably aware of the level of unconsciousness your life has been run from. So the aspects of unconsciousness are seated within our subconscious, and the less basically life we give to them, or the less we look at them, the more power and control they have in our day-to-day, even if we don't see them. That's just like the foundation of beginning all of this. And then the reason why I said uncomfortably aware is because when you really start to seek truth or know thyself, it can be extremely jarring. It can be daunting. Your process of seeking truth must be matched with the ultimate and undying willingness to see all of that truth without attachment or judgment of it. And the more that you seek the truth of who you are, how you've engaged, what behaviors you may have engaged in previously, whether it was an addiction or abuse or whatever it is, you take full responsibility of those aspects of unconsciousness, which aren't actually you. But then because the ego wants to be the thing of, well, don't look at that because then you're going to be this, and it's constantly chattering. So it's that center point of deep listening and exploring all these aspects where you're constantly taking inventory of your day-to-day actions and then having inquiry of, well, can that be true? Constantly asking your ego, can that be true? Which is also some of Byron Katie's work, which I recommend to all listeners. She has incredible, easy, applicable work for exploring your ego and exploring the stories that it projects to us and constantly piercing the veil of the dream that the ego projects. So then that leads to, that's a huge tuner. And when you can keep work, and you can almost look at it as its own like board of knobs, because the ego has 1,000 faces or 1,000,000 faces. So there's like maybe a year or two or a couple months, however long it takes you to really start to look and sit with all those aspects. The breath work for me has been a key modality of diving into deeper altered state, which just means that when you do this breath work that I do, which is a simple 2-part pranayama, you activate the ductless glands, which are the glands seated behind our energy centers, our chakras. And when you do it for 30 minutes straight, which I try to do twice a day, you start to get those energy centers activated, particularly the hypothalamus. So within the first 5 to 7 minutes of the breath work, the resistance from the ego is the loudest, because as you're activating this hypothalamus center, it's forcing the brain to get into a different brainwave state, which is more non-linear. And then that linear aspect wants to say all that it says to you day in, day out of why you shouldn't go there. And that's, for me, my daily meditation of like, okay, what's it telling me today? And so that's where that deep listening and that foundational process of simply entering into like a centered place of awareness. Who am I? Do I really want to seek to know myself? Because seeking to truly know thyself is a deep path. And anyone who's listening obviously is beginning to, or interested in this radical path of truth and seeking. And I want to applaud everybody for taking the brave step, for being here today and listening, for listening to me. Maybe it's your first time experiencing listening to something like this. And I just want to thank you for your time, because it's like, if we can just open ourselves to all these different modalities, some will resonate, some don't. It doesn't matter, because you are the master of your own reality. You are the creator of your own reality. And I think the biggest thing that we're all waking up to is that it's like we're all sovereign beings, and sovereignty means boundaries. Sovereignty means knowing thyself. Sovereignty means speaking thy truth, and speaking thy truth, as long as it's from that energy frequency band of love, it doesn't matter how it's going to be received from the other, because that space of your truth might trigger all of the untruth that is controlling that other person, place, or thing.
Yes.
So I would say the most common thing across the board when people come in is learning how to find, okay, what tuner is like cranked to the highest volume and completely on surround sound in my level of existence. And then we start to work on getting those other tuners that bring the person to the highest state of mind, not by anything I'm doing, by all of their literally being there in reception with an open heart, willing to open to their abilities, which has everything to do with everything they are doing themselves. So always about empowering the person who's coming in, always about telling them you're here at your own discretion, you have your own free will, and everything is within your hands and within your power. Typically it's like, nice to see you again, because if we're passing through in this earth plane and intersecting, there's a much bigger reason for it. And so some people move at different paces than others, and that matters completely not.
Mm-hmm.
It just more so means like maybe this person has some more sludge in their physical body, or this person has a little bit more static radio noise in their mental body. And if you think about radio stations, I like to imagine the radio antenna as the masculine energy. It's penetrating up into the higher cosmos. And then there's the circle in the center where the information comes in. And that's like the visual of the feminine receptive energy. And they have to work hand in hand. And we're all, as the masculine and feminine within us all, we're all I would love to see us all walk hand in hand together forward and begin to see past any movements or dialogue or discourse that creates heightened polarity. So also tuning into deeper, subtle senses to see within the space of internet or information or propaganda, whatever you want to call it, what larger forces are working behind that to drive that information, and always just being in that space of deep listening and observation and being like, okay, I recognize that that's coming from a place of coercion or manipulation, and I don't need to let that penetrate my field.
You know, you said so many things in there that I was like, hell yes, you know, and what I like, you know, and that's not uncommon from when I talk to. I mean, everything, we're just on such a similar frequency, and I just like, I get so battery charged from these discussions that we have. And, you know, this is why, like, you know, you mentioned the term know thyself. And that is like the slogan of mystery school, right? And also like it reminds me of what I talk about light. Everyone's like love and light, right? And I use these terms, right? But I think for a long time, I anyway thought love and light was like, positive and it's great. And yes, it is, right? But the process of how that love and light actually works can be pretty fucking brutal. Because the analogy I give a lot is if you've been living in a very dark house for a long time, and so in your head, you have all these truths made up about this house, right? You know your way around there. It's totally clean. You would be able to know if it wasn't clean, right? Even though you can't really see it, you just have this knowing, right? That it's clean, it's going to be fine. You have all these certain belief systems around it. You think you know how many rooms are in it, but you don't notice you're living in pitch blackness, right? Then all of a sudden, you have this idea of, well, I want to add light to my life, right? So that could be therapy, coaching, going to the mystery school, having channeling sessions, whatever it is, right? Yoga, whatever it is, right? All of a sudden, this light hits this dark room. And what is the first thing that you see when light hits a dark room? Holy shit, this place looks nothing like I thought it did. It's dirty. It's got cobwebs everywhere. What are these other rooms that I didn't even know existed, right? So again, that process can be like, it's almost like the caterpillar becoming a butterfly, right? It's like a beautiful thing for us humans to look at and be like, oh, wow, that looks so cool. But the process of a caterpillar going into its, like cocoon, molting essentially, and then turning into a butterfly, it's a pretty wild process, right? And I think it's same, obviously different, but like it's same to what we go through as we're shedding the masks of the ego. Like you were saying, right? The ego wears so many different masks, and it's very interesting because, I think that for a lot of people, I don't like. Originally, when I got into this stuff, I was like, I want to tell everyone. I want everyone to know. And now what I've realized is that, first of all, I'm not going to tell anyone anything because what's true for me could not be true for them straight up. Also, my priorities in this lifetime are not everyone's priorities. Like, in terms of like, hey, it's some people's lifetimes to quote unquote wake up. But just the fact that some people don't want to, that doesn't mean they're wrong or that they're living their life in a way like that could be part of their karma. This could be part of their evolution where they have a different lesson to learn, and so like that's been really big for me to understand and be able to have empathy for. And that's why I loved this. A buddy of mine told me that one of his mentors has this way of vetting people, right? In terms of like, because again, I know, based on my own experience, what it's like to learn something really cool, benefit from it, and then go try to tell people that I didn't realize did not want to hear it. Like they weren't inviting me to tell them about things. So he has this system where, let's say he's talking about something like in channeling, right? He's talking about it, and he's like, oh, this is what I do. If someone goes, oh, that's awesome. Like, where'd you learn that? He's like, okay, I'm not just going to go tell them everything yet because I don't know how, like that could just be an automated response, right? Like you were talking about, it's just kind of those things. So he goes, well, I read a good book once, and if they go, what book? Now he knows they're really engaged and he can start really telling them. But if they go, oh, cool, that's awesome, and they just keep talking, okay, cool. They weren't ready to listen and there wasn't going to be a good energetic reciprocity. And, at best, they probably just wouldn't have listened. He would have wasted energy. At worst, they're like, why did this guy tell me all that, right? So it's so important to be able to wield the power of discernment in our lives, right? Because again, discernment is everything. And that's why you want to know thyself. Like that is the biggest quote unquote argument for it, because think about the world right now. There's a lot of people saying a lot of things and a lot of people are unaware they're living in Watiko, right? Let's just say the unhealthy people, visibly unhealthy, that are trying to now tell healthy people how to be healthy, right? Just an example, right? Where a lot of my healthy friends fell into that. And I'm like, hey, why are you taking advice from someone who clearly does not know how to be healthy in their own life? Again, like if I want to learn to be a race car driver, I'm not going to learn from someone who's gotten 5 DUIs and never driven a race car. It's like, doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means they don't have the skill set of being able to like actually teach me whatever I'm looking to learn. And so being able to use discernment the same way that, for instance, someone might go, Mary, just trust me on this. Trust me, right? And something in you might go, I don't know. But if you're not tapped into that, you might just go, okay, logically, they seem trustworthy. They have an acronym after their name, like PhD or something like that. So I'm going to trust them. And now you're externalizing your power onto them without even knowing it. The other thing that's really interesting here too is that in most cases, like, I think for me, I always thought like there was people that were evil and trying to do this stuff. People just don't know what they don't know. So the unhealthy person trying to convince someone to be healthy, they think they're doing the best thing they
Yeah.
can, right? So it's not like they have bad intentions most of the time. Like even if you talk to the most like quote unquote evil people, somehow they've wrapped themselves into a mind virus and thinking that they're actually doing the best thing they could, and that's the part that, we get to be aware of, is that I don't think there's anyone out there that's choosing to do evil based on the fact of like, I'm going to do evil. They're just in some type of Watiko, which is what Paul Levy talks about to describe this kind of mind virus, where you're just so unconscious that you just don't know what you don't know. And that's why so many people can have such challenging experiences with psychedelics. One of the many reasons, but it's because you get like, whereas with, spiritual doctrines and things like that, yes, you will definitely have those things happen where you can have like shocks to the system when the light hits it. But a lot of the challenge with psychedelics is that people just think it's going to be fun. And then they go do like 5-MeO DMT and all the light hits at once. And it can be like shattering, right? The ego, it can actually fracture you, And so it's so interesting. And you're totally speaking my language.
Oh my gosh. I mean, everything you're saying, it's like I got into this trance because it's so resonant. And also I think everything you're speaking to is like, it's like wrapping around the teachings of true sovereignty. And it's like, as you said, when you said the example of Mary, just trust me, or whatever it was that you said, the way that in my body, and it's very sensitive. So when I feel like somebody is speaking from a place of not knowing what they don't know, unconsciousness, another way of putting it, programming, control, it can feel like a sword straight to the center of my stomach and going like this. And it's upon my duty, our duty as sovereign beings, to remove that sword or be in an energetic space where the sword kind of tries to stab into your auric field, but it doesn't actually do so. You hold that guarded, protected, or more so just like armored with light energy, and it becomes more mirroring for that person without even saying anything, because we are all telepathic. That is not mine to take. I will not take your sword for you, because we're not living in a space of victim or martyrdom anymore, that's thousands of years old. That paradigm is now shattering. It's interesting that you mentioned also the thing about not having to have this megaphone and talk about who you are and what you know and these things. I think the biggest message that I've been getting lately is, again, Mary, you need to keep listening. You need to keep listening, and you don't have to say anything. And I will speak with it in my practices, like, again, and when I say speak to it, I don't even mean like I'm sitting there having an audible conversation. And this is, I think, important for people to kind of really understand, or at least lean into. When you are beginning to like engage with your higher self or these subtle energies, it's more about being in stillness and exercising deeper senses that don't look like your standard conversation with a person at the coffee shop or seeing a bird flying across the sky. It's a totally different experiential, energetic realm that you enter into. But one of what I'll say to it, meaning I'll feel back to the energy, I have a job that requires me to talk. So if you're calling me to be in a vow of silence for however long, I would love to do that. But I also have to, what I do for work requires speaking. And really the message keeps being, on all the time that you have in between words, be in deep silence, in devotion to me, to it, Source Universe. And in that devotion to Source Universe, which is another Yogananda type of kind of teaching, I guess, in a way, is that devotional aspect of silence with God, universe or source. And as you continue to return to that space of deep quiet and deep listening, you begin to differentiate all the different wavelengths of static noise, collective lies, or collective brainwashing, whatever it is, or even just the toxic relationship you might be in where there's dysfunctional conversation or abuse, or both of your hurt inner children are constantly in battle with one another. constantly coming back to that space of deep listening and love so that you kind of calibrate yourself to be there. And then these people, these places, these things begin to not be able to exist so strongly in your field because you're not allowing those tethers to perforate your field and hook onto you. And those hooks aren't even able to hook in because those aspects of your ego that say, I must people please, I must be a doormat, I must take care of others more than myself, which is all the childhood trauma stuff. You start to look and release those things, and you give people back what they try to give you and make you responsible for. And I think for empathic, sensitive, people who are drawn to this field, so much of it is speaking truth and not and releasing people pleasing proclivities and mastering your empathetic boundaries and knowing thyself, which it's so funny. I'm like, maybe I should check out this mystery school, like all these things you're saying that they say. And I've heard of the mystery school. And I know of people in it. But it's so funny that there's so many things that it keeps coming into the conversation.
Yeah. That's how I originally found them was, I watched Gaia and I was just like drawn in. I was called to it, and it felt like just like that, like I remember when I was a kid and, this is actually a really funny memory. I don't think I've ever said on the podcast before, or either of the podcasts, but I remember the day where like, I don't know how to describe this, but I was very young and I remember like, I would just wake up and be, right? I would play with things, whatever. And I remember the day I woke up and things felt different where I was like, oh, like, I don't want to play with that toy because it's old. And like, I started to like really go over that kind of stuff and feel that. And so like, I've now noticed in my adult life where I tap back into like the just being and allowing myself to just move throughout whatever's interesting me at that time versus like I should be doing this right now, so I'm going to do it for this long and kind of like allowing the mind to make my schedule. And so this was one of the nights where Rach was hosting retreats. So I was alone and interacted with some cannabis on the weekend and just was like, all right, what do I want to do? Because I was like, I got to read a book or do something productive. And I was like, honestly, I just want to put my bed on zero gravity and just watch Gaia. Yeah. And so I found this show called Mystery Teachings and just got like just completely swallowed up by it and just started watching it. And I was like, wow, these guys are saying a lot of stuff that I really like. And that's how I got involved in it. And so it's funny you mentioned that because I totally know it's like, when things resonate now, I don't even try to find out why. I just go, okay, cool. I'm going to buy the ticket and take the ride into it. And, it's so funny you mentioned all the stuff you were mentioning, because I think if there's one muscle that I would generalize and say everyone needs to wield with very accurate and intentional power, it is discernment, and it's much easier said than done. But at the same time, like, this is why silence is so important and spiritual practice is so important, and I think that like, it's one of the reasons. I mean, there's many reasons, but, I think like we live in a world where I think that, at least for me, I'll make it personal again. I think for me, I thought of danger as someone coming at me with a knife or trying to fight me or a gun or like any of this stuff, where in reality, yes, that is definitely an example or a scenario of dangerous things. We live in a dangerous world where also people that truly believe they're doing the best with the information they have are looking to program you and looking to put their belief systems onto you and looking to put their trauma onto you. And that is all very dangerous too. And it's a slower burn, So whereas like you're walking down an alleyway, you see someone that looks sketchy, you're probably going to know right away, I got to get the hell out of here. Like it's almost like, with cigarettes, right? You're killing yourself slowly, things like that. This is kind of more of a slower burn where you're just unknowingly taking stuff on. And all is like, I feel like shit, I must have an Advil deficiency. I must have an alcohol deficiency. I guess I just need these things to cope with life. When in reality, it's like at any point we can stop, remember who we are and our power and go, no. And then from there, we can actually start reprogramming or reprogramming and actually putting what we want in there. And Mary, this has been amazing. I can't wait to have you back on. We barely scratched the surface and we've already gone an hour. It's amazing. I know. It's hilarious. I want to make sure people know where they can find you. If you have any upcoming classes or anything like that, we'll link it all in the show notes. But where can people find you? Where can they connect with you and work with you?
Yes. So I have my website, experiencewithmary.com. You can just hop on there and schedule. I offer 2 sessions a 30-minute energy read followed by 30 minutes of the breath work that I teach. And then my other session is just 60-minute channeling. And you can do 30-minute add-ons because my sessions start at 60 minutes, but they can go up to 3 hours. I always leave it up to the person. I'll say typically people do want to go past the 60-minute, which is why then I work with people either twice weekly, monthly, every 3 months, but it's never up to me. It's always up to the person if they if they want to come in, when they want to come in. When people ask me, I want to come in tomorrow or next week, should I? I'm always like, I will never tell you if or when you should come in. So if you're called, if anything I said resonate, hop on my site or send me a DM at my Instagram, which is something with no G .about.mary.
Love that name, by the way.
If you have any more inquiries or if you want to see more, videos of things that I do, I post some stuff on there. But I just want to also just thank anyone who's listened and especially if you've made it this far in the podcast. And Ryan, I'm just so grateful for meeting you, for this work that you're doing, for all these people that you're helping. You have such a bright spirit, and for
thank you
being one of those people who I trusted with like my energy and whatever to come out on this platform. Cause as y'all know, it's been super interesting coming out in this internet space and exposing myself.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you.
That's so cool. Oh, you're so welcome. It's been a pleasure having you on. And like I said, I can't wait to have you back. And, speaking of discernment, I have a last question for you that I like to ask everyone. And not every podcast I talk to someone in, do I go over discernment, but this question directly relates to discernment, which is very interesting, that we went over discernment last too, which is, let's say someone listens to this episode and they're interested in both the ideas we spoke about and also psychedelics and just shifting their state of consciousness and all this type of stuff. What is the most important piece of advice you would relay to them to allow them to properly use discernment in choosing whether or not this type of work, psychedelics, and shifting their consciousness is right for them at this point in time?
It's a really good and deep question. I'd say, because I get this question a lot with regard to people who even before they book with me will be like, I just have been following you for a while and I'm really called to book, or I just have so much fear around what you do and all these things. And so the very first thing I point to is, so thank you for reaching out, whatever it is. And then I say, if it is the fear that is driving your resistance, simply look at that and discern. By looking at that, you then begin the process of discerning, is this fear controlling my life? Is it controlling my decisions? If I remove the fear, or if I try to sit with this, maybe do some meditation with it for a few weeks, some breath work, whatever modalities you look to work through fear, once that fear sort of sheds, do you still feel called to move forward with whether it's sitting with a medicine or sitting with the channeling session? And then sometimes there never seems to be a right time to do things. And I say that because our ego can be so the overlord of our life and so controlling. It can be the lens by which our eyes are only seeing through, so that sometimes it can be a matter of taking a quantum leap. And so there is kind of a fine line of like, okay, sometimes I might have to discern if I need to just take this leap, or I need to discern where this fear is controlling me. The other two I will say is just discerning how you feel in your body and how grounded you are. I am a clear channel, so I don't introduce any substances into my body. I have not had alcohol since 2014. I am by no means saying that is the way for anybody, but part of how it has worked for me is that it has allowed my receptor centers, my clear senses, to be the things that really are clear, open, and I know what is my energy and what is not. Therefore, my ability to discern feels clear. But again, we're in the earth school. So part of our process here is to evolve as souls. And we are always, out of our hands, going to be served lessons and things that are going to push us to evolve. So that's not to say anyone sitting and saying they've mastered discernment. It's like we're masters on this earth, sharpening our swords of discernment constantly. So part of that is taking a leap forward into a space that you are unfamiliar with. But I will say I think psychedelics or plant medicine, because I work with a lot of people who come in from those journeys and they may have felt fractured or ungrounded or lost. It's about integrating. So really, to really circle up the answer, you are your own master. You are your own guru. You have all of the power within to know thyself. And sometimes when you're on your journey, it can feel like you don't know where to go. And sometimes it requires discerning if fear is controlling you in a really subtle, hidden way. Sometimes it's saying, fuck it, I'm just going to do this. And I will integrate the consequences or whatever after. Not that consequences can be negatively connotated, but I think you know what I mean.
100%. And that was stated perfectly, and I think that it is a little complicated, right? Like it is a little complicated to understand how to use discernment. And that's the fun of it, right? If it was an easy game, we'd be bored pretty easily, and I think that for a lot of people, it's getting used to living in this different type of way where you're listening to intuition and these types of deeper, sources of wisdom within us rather than just the logical mind. And then the logical mind is not a bad thing. It's just that it works much better when you have options of being able to go throughout these senses. Yes. And so I absolutely love that. And okay, ladies and gents, when I first met Mary, her and I immediately hit it off, and it felt as though we had picked up, like I was saying before, right where we had left off in a previous lifetime. As such, after having such an amazing heart flow of a conversation when we met, combined with the incredible work she has done and continues to do in the realms of channeling, deprogramming the ego, and accessing the quantum field, I knew I had to have her on the show to dive down the rabbit hole with me and allow each of you to get a snapshot of her world. For anyone looking to get in touch with Mary and benefit from the incredible services she offers, check out the show notes for this episode, where I will be listing exactly how to go about contacting her today. Mary, thank you so much for sharing your time, experience, and wisdom with the listeners and me on the show today, for charging my battery each time we chat, and for being a bright light that is passionate about serving others and helping them achieve the highest quality life possible. And until next time, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.
Aho.